Yeah, welcome to another episode of the Racer X Exhaust podcast brought to you by Yoshimura. This is the conclusion of the cliffhanger that we left you with our podcast that we posted on Friday. Davey Coombs back on the line with myself, Jason Weigandt. We will discuss the second half of the history of Team USA at the Motocross of Nations, because the Motocross of Nations is coming to RedBud this weekend. The Monster Energy Motocross of Nations at RedBud. Can you believe it? If you're looking up plane flights now and it costs less than $3,000, I say that's a worthy investment. Get there now, although I don't know exactly where you'll go when you're there because the place is, I'm hearing, like totally filled up. But that's only going to make it that much more exciting. In this episode, we take you through Team USA from 1986 all the way through the present day. But big thanks to our sponsor, Yoshimura. Always a part of the Exhaust Podcast. Check them out for anything you need four-stroke exhaust, be it your ATV, your dirt bike, your street bike. They sell a ton of these for those Groms and Z125s and cool motorcycles like that. There'll probably be some pit bikes even running around with Yoshimura exhaust at RedBud. That'll be awesome, and we'll be celebrating it in a big, big way. Just announced today, we're going to have a live video show Friday and Saturday night from the track. So if you're at the track, if you're at RedBud, we encourage you to come to the race day stage, and that'll be set up right by the night track at RedBud, which is also where the campground is, so that'll be exciting. Friday night and Saturday night will be airing from 6 to 11 p.m., 5 straight hours local time, Friday and Saturday night. So if you're there, come hang out, get your costumes on, your face paint, your signs, your wardrobe. And if you're not there, you can watch live on racertv.com. We'll have a huge cast of characters because Friday night we have the Motocross of Nations experience where practically every rider who has ever ridden for Team USA will be there in attendance. We'll interview those folks. We'll get you inside the dinner to see what the bench racing stories are like. On Saturday, we'll be talking about the big qualifying races that will have taken place earlier that day. We'll cover the Thor pit bike donations, which will take place on the track right behind us. And it's an interactive stage. It's right there in the heart of it all. So if you're there, get involved. If you're not there, watch us on Racer TV. This is going to be awesome. Go follow at Racer TV if you want to get the latest updates on this show. I will be hosting, and Davey will be there too. So you're going to hear a lot of more cool, modern, up-to-date, as of RedBud this weekend stuff from Davey. But right now, we're going to get back in the Wayback Machine and celebrate the second half of Team USA history on this special edition of the Racer X Exhaust Podcast. But first, this. Oh, hey, how about that? My phone just dinged. Texting Ryan Sipes and Kevin Windham and Travis Pastrana right now. A, I'm a name dropper, and B, we're also get up close and personal and learn as much as we can about Team Puerto Rico. We are just going to blow it out on the Racer X website this week and next, pre and post Motocross of Nations. Enjoy this podcast. Enjoy the Racer TV live show from 6 to 11 each night, Friday and Saturday. They also announced the race will be on television, live on CBS Sportsnet, Sunday afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock Eastern Time on Sunday. So this is it. Whatever plans you have over the next week, just cancel them, especially this weekend. It's full bore, full focus. Motocross of Nations. Podcast. 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 Okay, so here we are, part 2. This is like the cliffhanger. You all know what was coming after 1985. What most people say is the best Motocross of Nations team performance maybe ever. I don't know if it matches 5 Brits going across the line together 30 years earlier or whatever, but this 86 is the one that, for whatever reason, seems to ring out loudest in history.
I think that 1986 was the zenith of all things 80s. It was another, all-team Honda group with David Bailey, Rick Johnson, Johnny O'Mara. They're all sort of at the total peak of their careers, especially RJ and Bailey. And they go to Maggiora, Italy, which is, again, that track that has a special place for the United States and Team USA over the years. And they just lay down an all-time ass-whipping on the whole world. And what makes this event so much different is not just the absolute dominance of what they did, but the fact that it was filmed. And now we're getting into that point where everyone in the world can see what the Americans are doing. Bailey is dominant on the 500, RJ on the 250. But what we remember that race for is the guy who didn't win, Johnny O'Mara. He was on a 125. He beat everybody else in the world in the 500 class, and he beat everyone else in the world in the 250 class. And ironically, it was his last hurrah with Team Honda because he'd been told that he was not going to be re-signed for 1987, and he was pretty upset about it. And he went out and rode the wheels off that bike, and consequently right into, I guess you'd say, the Valhalla of the Motocross of Nations, because a 125 had never gone that fast or finished that high. It had only been a year that they'd been in the event, but it would take 10 years before anyone actually bettered what Johnny O'Mara did. And, the sad part about it is a lot of people use that race to make European riders look out to be much less than what they were. And specifically Dave Thorpe, the British rider, the multi-time 500cc world champion, and as you recall, the guy who had won the outright overall the year before, beating Bailey and Ward in Lachine. He had problems that day. His brakes were going out. And again, O'Mara had the ride of a lifetime. And it led Jody Weisel to call Dave the world's fastest novice, which was kind of an insult to the way he rode and his style, but it was, I think Jody meant it to be funny, but I don't think Dave ever got over it. And I've become friends with Dave over the years, and yeah, it grind on him pretty good. He would go on to do great things and win more world championships after that. But here in the United States, sadly, that's the one thing we remember. We don't remember Thorpe winning the year before. We just remember him getting beat by 125. So did everyone else.
Didn't race 87. I don't know if he was hurt, but I'd always heard he was so mad about the whole thing and the way it turned out in 86 that he just didn't want to be a part of it, especially maybe not in a race taking place in the United States. I don't know if that's true or if he maybe was hurt, but that was the rumor at the time. He just didn't want any part of coming to America after the way 86 and kind of the way he was treated and stuff. Because he wasn't on the team.
That's one worth looking up, but
yep.
I will say that if this were Team Britain podcast, I'd have it for you.
Yeah, exactly. One other thing I remember Jody writing, and I'm just going to do a little foreshadowing here. I remember years later, he used to make fun of the riding style of all those Grand Prix guys, and Thorpe especially. And I remember him calling out, he's like, but there's one Brit who apparently has a more American, good riding style, and expect big things from this guy, Paul Malin. But as we know, on the Grand Prix side, it never quite worked out for Malin to be the multi-time world champ. It is for Thorpe, but I just remember reading that name and saying he could be the next Thorpe, and just everyone listening, just remember that name for later on. Hey, 86, we know in 96, and we'll get there, that Team USA had arguably as good a day, but they went 1-2 in every moto, and as far as I can tell, I don't know if that's ever happened, because even in 96, I think Tortelli got in there and got like a second ahead of Emig or something when Lamson won the moto. They went 1-2 in every moto, and I think that's the ultimate high watermark. I don't know if that's ever happened again. That's crazy.
No, yeah. But I do think there was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by England that year we've been talking about in
right.
62.
Yep.
And then the Swedes did it in 64, but it was much different then. There was only a handful of countries participating.
And they were all on the same bikes. They were all on 500s.
And also there were no Americans around to get in the middle of them and no one else. But the 86 thing, you also have to put it into the context of what happens next. Mm-hmm. And that is that in January of 1987, David Bailey, who was undefeated as a member of Team USA throughout the 80s, crashes at Lake Huron at a Trans-Cal Series or Golden State race, and his career ends right there on the spot. He's paralyzed, and that's, I think, another reason that we look back so fondly on 86 is that it was the last best race for David Bailey, And of course, a lot of people know him now as the icon and, his fantastic Hall of Fame television career and all the things he did in the triathlons and whatnot. But, if you're my age, you still remember Majora 86, and it was just a phenomenal day for Bailey as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned those videos. Anyone can find that out there. I mean, they're doing some jumps. This is a long time ago now, and obviously riding and scrubbing and jumping has advanced a long way, but you see some of the stuff those guys are doing in the hills, it still looks pretty impressive even now.
Yeah.
They were on it.
Well,
yep.
Well, the irony is the next year the United States would finally get to host the Motocross of Nations, and it would go to the least Supercrossy track that we have in the United States then and now, and that is Unadilla. And, it was a chance where if they could have put that race at, we'll say RedBud or one of the other big tracks at the time, I think we would have had even more of an advantage. But instead, because Unadilla had been holding 250 GP races, had been holding Trans Ams and Inter-Ams when they were around, the FIM awards it to Ward Robinson, and unfortunately, and no one could have guessed it, it would turn out to be the rainiest weekend in upstate New York, probably since Woodstock, back in '68 or '69 or whenever that was.
Yeah,
and it was just a terrible mutter, and it actually evened the field out a lot more for the Europeans, and this time it was pretty darn close, and we were fortunate that the guys that we picked, Bob Hanna on the 125, very controversially, because Mickey Diamond at that point was a two-time 125 champ and ended up being overlooked because the sentimental favorite was Hanna. Well, it turned out to be the right pick because it was so muddy, and Hanna loved the mud. And Jeff Ward was an excellent 500cc rider in the wet or the dry. And then, of course, there was Rick Johnson, who was the winner the year before, and he was just absolutely dominant that day in the mud. But still, we barely won over the Netherlands. And right then, that's when you could start to feel things changing. We've won this thing 6 years in a row, but the pressure's starting to build. Nobody wants to be on the losing team.
Yeah, I actually talked to Bevo 40 about this recently. He said it was basically he and Larry Myers that got the AMA to put Hanna on the team. And that's kind of the perfect circle there for Hanna because he had we were saying, maybe one real shot at the Donations at his peak, and it didn't quite win. And it looked like there was never going to be, out of all these Team USAs, a Bob Hanna on a victorious Team USA. They snuck him in there. He was still good at that track. I don't even think he was racing all the races by 87. He was semi-retired.
He was riding a sort of abbreviated schedule. He did go out and do one 125 national, if memory serves me correctly.
Okay. Yeah.
But it was the only way at that time for him to get on that team. And I can remember thinking, I
yes,
don't know, man. Maybe we should have put Lachine on the 125 Cowie or let Mickey Diamond race or something. But in the end, Larry Myers and Bevo 40 were right, and so was Bob Hanna. And it was a fine end to his career for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so the pressure's now starting to build. I could go on and on with that Unadilla 87, and maybe I will myself. I was there. I was 8 years old. It was the wildest thing ever. But by the way, I do want to say, all weekend when I was there, everyone said, you cannot believe the pageantry of these races in Europe. They're amazing. And everyone said, you will never see this race in the United States again. It's so much grander in Europe. I don't think the weather helped. And everyone said, this is once in a lifetime. It'll never come back. And darn close to it. I mean, it took 20 damn years for it to come back. It wasn't like a rousing success in the way of, it probably didn't help that Team USA was winning a lot, so maybe they didn't want to give the home field advantage. But after that Unadilla one, it was like, look, you're going to have to win it on foreign soil forever because it's not coming back here anytime soon. And like you said, it started getting close after a while.
Yep. Yeah, and there was one other side note to that. Following the race, there was a guy who worked for the AMA at the time named Ned Redway. And Ned Redway was most famous before this for having disqualified Ron Lachine from the Steel City 125 USGP when Lachine slept in and missed the mandatory registration. And but Ned said that if the Americans won, he'd take them to the White House because he was friends. An old family friend was Ronald Reagan, the president at the time, and lo and behold, Ned Redway did know the Reagans and did get Team USA to the White House. So Roger DeCoster and Roy Jansen were able to escort Bob Hanna, Rick Johnson, and Jeff Ward to the White House to shake President Reagan's hand, something that's never been done since, though, that we did get to take Plessinger to the White House earlier this year.
Yeah, that's right. They got to visit Ronald Reagan. We got Bob Hanna on the team, and we got him to meet Ronald Reagan. Every American has to be pumped that one time Bob Hanna and Ronald Reagan shook hands. It does not get any better. Okay, so 88, we go to France. I'd say that team was pretty obvious. I mean, Lachine, Ward, and RJ were clearly the three best guys all year long. So to me, it was more a matter of who's going to ride what. We got to send these guys, but what bikes are they going to ride? Yeah,
and I hate to out-bench race you, but at that event, the Americans went 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 in all three motos.
Oh, did they? I didn't know that Ward beat Bale each time?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
In the 250 class, Ricky Johnson went 1-2. In the 500 class, Lachine went 1-1. And in the 125 class, oh man, you're right.
Yeah.
I misread this.
Yep. Dude, it just shows, by the way, hey, this is perfect. This is actually perfect. Yeah, who's the one guy that managed to edge Wardy for like one spot in one moto?
Yeah, I was reading my sheet the wrong way. Bale was the top 125 in the first moto.
Yep.
And then Rob Herring was the top 500 guy or 250 guy in the second moto. RJ had started on the second row.
Oh, okay.
And Lachine cleared off with the win. RJ could only reach third. So still, it was a very dominant team. And we're now at the end of the line for two of Team USA's all-time heroes, because neither Johnson nor Lachine will ever ride the Des Nations again. RJ's going to break his wrist the next year, and Lachine, his career is about over, and then he breaks his femur the following year. And neither ever get to go back to the Des Nations as racers.
I wanted to bring up Bale only because I remember 87 Unadilla. I think he was pretty much unknown, but he led for a while, and people were like, who's this guy? And DeCoster was like, you just wait. And then by 88, he was world champ, and he battled Wardy. And Bale is critical because I know that we're trying to track the ebb and flow of how fast the European riders were against the Americans. Bale was going head-to-head with the Americans each year. I mean, he beat Jeff Ward in a moto in this. And we all know that the tide that he would create for all these other guys, and they would start getting a lot faster. But he was the only one that was kind of carrying the flag, I feel, at that point. Like, we're going to do this. And I don't believe he was ever really in the nation's team that had any chance of winning himself team-wise. But Bale's something special. We all know that.
Yeah, and the closest they would get would be that 88 race. And then in 89, Bale kind of loomed large over the deal because he went back to Europe after he had his, sort of intro in the United States, won the Gainesville National, went back to Europe, won the 250 World Championship, and Team USA was trying to figure out what they were going to do because everyone considered Ricky Johnson as sort of the de facto captain, but RJ was dealing with a wrist injury, and Jeff Stanton had emerged as the new Supercross champion, as the new 250 national champion, but Stanton was willing to ride the 125 for the one and only time in his career if Johnson wanted to be the 250 rider, because everyone knew that Ward would be the 500 guy, and so that was going to be the lineup. It was going to be Jeff Stanton on the 125, RJ on the 250, and Jeff Ward on the 500. So Stanton signs up for the 125 class at Unadilla for the USGP. He shows up in the middle of July and rides a support class race. But, before you shrug that off, Bradshaw was out there too, and Larry Ward and some other fast guys. But Stanton goes out, smokes everyone, and tells DeCoster, hey, I'm ready. And then RJ gets hurt again, late August, and Team USA is kind of in a bind, and they decide that they're going to put Jeff Stanton on the 250, and they invite a rookie to ride the 125, Mike Kudrowski. At this point, Kudrowski's not even the 125 national champion yet. He's number 762, completely unheard of in Europe. And, of course, as our guys do. He went out and he won the first moto on the 125, or at least he led the 125 class, while Jeff Ward was battling with Dave Thorpe on the 500. And then the second moto, Kedrowski gets second, and only Ali Puzar is able to beat him. And at that point, it's, all Jeff Stanton has to do is go out and do his thing. Stanton goes 1-1, and Team USA is now up to, 8 in a row?
Yeah, let's count here. 81.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. And if I remember right, it was kind of like, well, we got to send Kedrowski because we already have a Honda 125 going over there for Stanton, so we got to get another Honda 125 guy. But it was crazy how they could throw anybody in there, and it didn't matter. That was crazy. Yeah.
And again, we had talked about this earlier. There was a time in the 70s where whatever could go wrong would go wrong. That was the complete opposite in the 80s. And even when we would lose talent, we'd have a guy get hurt in between races, whatever, there was always like that next man up. And in the case of 1989, that next man was Mike Kedrowski. And in 1990, they could have brought Kedrowski. He's still racing a 125, but for some reason, they decide to invite Damon Bradshaw to ride the 125. At this point, I don't think, and this is no knock on the Beast from the East, and I know he's your boy, but no one really knew at that point that Damon was somewhat fragile in high-pressure situations. He'd won a 125 Supercross title at that point. Everyone thought that he would be the most dominant rider moving forward, but it never quite worked out, and he never won another championship. And he would be on Team USA on a 125. Again, strange choice, because we had guys like Kedrowski, Guy Cooper, Mike LaRocco. There was a bunch of young, fast guys, but they went with Bradshaw, and Bradshaw ends up crashing out of the second moto. He suffers a concussion. He's a no-go, and suddenly it looks bleak for Team USA. Fortunately, Jeff Ward's on the 500. He goes second, and that puts it, and then ninth in the last moto, and that puts the whole thing on top of Jeff Stanton. And this is the race where Jeff Stanton takes over as sort of Captain America. He wins the year before, but it's in Vimmerby, Sweden in 1990 that he puts country ahead of everything else. There was a Belgian rider named Dirk Gherkens, and he had spent the whole weekend sort of agitating the Americans. This was sort of the new breed of Belgian riders who were 10 years removed from ever winning a Des Nations after winning them almost every year for, most of the 60s and 70s. And Gherkens was not really respectful of the Americans and decided that he was going to try something that no one else did, which is just ride really aggressive, trying to irritate them and whatever. Well, that lasted till about the second to last lap of the last moto. Stanton's coming through. Bevo's telling him, you got to catch this guy. You got to catch this guy. He's jumping up and down. He's yelling and waving. And on the second to last lap, in the back where no one can see, there's no film footage of it, Stanton absolutely parks this guy and just drops him. And that is the difference. And Team USA wins again. And that's the 10th year in a row.
That is high drama, and I know even more drama is coming the next time. By the way, what is the Roger DeCoster timeline here? Is he still the team manager at this point? Because I know he actually goes away at some point. Is he still the guy?
Roger DeCoster is, in fact, the team manager, and he'll stay there through 91.
Okay.
The next year, the race will be at a track that was kind of an Achilles heel for us, you would think, Valkenswaard in the Netherlands. It's a deep, dark brown sand track, not the kind of thing that we really had in the States at that time. Gainesville was still on the schedule. Southwick was on the schedule, but beyond that, we'd kind of gotten away from a lot of the other sand tracks and sand series we were doing, like the Florida Winter Ams, Golden States, etc. And so this seemed like the best chance for both Belgium and the Netherlands to beat us, and then things start happening just the way Belgium and the Netherlands would want it to. And that is that, once again, we bring over Bradshaw, and Damon doesn't have a very good last moto. He gets second in the 250 class in the first moto, but the second moto he struggles, and he only gets fifth. The problem is that Mike Kudrowski, who was the 125 guy this time on a Kawasaki, he goes 4-2, which is not exactly great for who Kudrowski was and what we were used to. And once again, it's all on Jeff Stanton's shoulders in the last moto. He's the 500 rider for Team Honda, and then Jeff goes out and crashes like 3 times early in the moto. And everything seems lost for the U.S., and then once again, Stanton just puts his head down. He starts picking people off, and by the last lap, he finally got to where he needed to be. He passed, I think it was Marnique Bervoets and Dirk Gherkins, and Team USA is able to win, just squeak it out one more time.
Yeah, the just squeak it out is really the key. For a while, it was like anyone they threw on the team, it was no problem. It was almost showboating where they're going 1-2 in motos, 125s beating 500s. But those 90 and 91 ones were such nail-biters, and now the streak is up to mammoth proportions. You've gone from 1981 to 91. It sure seemed like now everyone was scared to be on the team the year we lost. Eventually, they're going to lose, and everybody is scared of being on the team that loses, because now it's kind of like Ryan Villapoto winning 4 Supercross titles. Now it's just a relief when you win, like, oh my God, I cannot lose, as opposed to joy. It's just pressure. I don't think there's any enjoyment anymore with these guys being on Team USA, and that starts playing a huge factor in who is going to be on the team, because this last 2 nail-biters, I think it sapped everybody.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is on everyone's mind as they're starting to pick the team for 1992.
Yeah.
And two things are extraordinary about this 92 Destinations that's coming up. Number one, Team Honda lets Roger DeCoster go. They were cutting back. Roger was, I think, kind of looking for something else anyway. He ends up moving back to Europe to focus on the Becci's Honda team. If you remember, that was Yves de Maria and I think Talon Bolin rode for him for a little bit. DeCoster is no longer in the picture, and he decides that includes Team USA as well. They did give him the opportunity to coach the team or manage the team in 92 if he wanted, but he decided not to. And part of that was because a lot of the top riders were opting out. And that's because this other extraordinary thing. The race was in Australia, and it was in the middle of the AMA National Championships. There would still be 2 races to run after they came back from I take it back, there were 3 races that were yet to be run once they came back from Australia. So Damon Bradshaw, he's had enough of Team USA at this point. Even though he only did it twice, even though he won both times, or at least Team USA won, Bradshaw has a tough year in 92, losing the Supercross title to Stanton at the last second. He decides he doesn't want to go. Stanton, who's never won a 500 title, decides that he wants to focus on getting that 500 title because he's already won the 250 title, he's already won Supercross, so he decides not to go. And if he's not going, then Mike Kudrowski and Jeff Ward decide they don't want to go either. Ward's getting at the end of his career. Kudrowski is a fine 500 rider, and he wants to be able to focus on dealing with Stanton. So the AMA is pondering the idea of not sending anybody at all.
Wow.
And at this point, a guy works at the AMA, Roy Jansen. He's the director of motocross, and you know him now because we see him every weekend at the races, and he's a longtime part of the Lucas Oil Pro Motocross Series, and also, of course, MX Sports, and a bench racer just like me and you.
Supercross before that, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Roy is basically, he inherits the manager's position, and he talks two young American riders, both 125cc riders, in the going, Jeff Emig and Mike LaRocco. And what's interesting about this is they are in the middle of a national championship battle. They are the two guys that are battling for the 125 title in 1992. In fact, LaRocco is the points leader, and Emig is second when it's time to go to Australia. The third guy is an even bigger, I guess you'd say, outsider. Even Donnie Schmidt had told the AMA no, he didn't want to go. Donnie was the 250 world champion at this time, and like Trampas Parker, who was a two-time world champion, he felt overlooked by the AMA the last couple years, and he decides he doesn't want to go to Australia either. And so we're down to basically no one, and Roy Jansen calls a journeyman 500cc Grand Prix rider named Billy Lyles and asks him if he'll ride for Team USA. That's how low we'd gotten in trying to figure out who to send in 92.
Yeah, that pressure, man. When you say Godrowski, Ward, Bradshaw, and Stanton all decided not to race, I mean, you probably could argue those were the four biggest names in American motocross, and they all decided not to race. I mean, Lyles was decent in the GPs. He never won a title. He won some races. But you're right, journeyman fits his name quite well. This is the famous B team, as they would become dubbed, because this was not the A list that you would have wanted at first.
No, and because the track in Manjimup was also sand, it was also a foregone conclusion that the Belgians would finally win. They had George Jobet, who by this time I think is a five-time world champion. They had Stefan Everts, who is the heir apparent to the crown in Europe. And they had Marnique Bervoets, another one of those great riders that never won a world title but won a whole bunch of GPs. And Great Britain wasn't bad either. They had Kurt Nicole, they had James Dobb and Rob Herring, and the French, they had the wild card, Jean-Michel Bayle. This would turn out to be the last time that Bayle would race in the Des Nations as well. And JMB would go out and win a moto on a 500, but everyone knew that he was already out the door headed to road racing. And right then, you'd think that somebody would step up and knock off the Americans because there's this giant, target on their backs, and they're not exactly the best Americans at that time. But everything goes wrong for everyone else once again. Stefan Everts' bike breaks down. He's, obviously going to beat Emig in the moto, and that makes all the difference because he can't finish. He's a DNF, and that becomes the throwaway score for the Belgians, and they never were able to get themselves out of that hole. Emig goes 1-2, LaRocco goes 2-2 on the 250, and Billy Lyles goes 2-2 on the 500, and Team USA wins again.
Wow. Yeah, we had a great story about that, I remember, in the magazine with Roy, who had to put the team together. I think he said of all his, 50-some years in the industry, that was like his proudest moment, getting that B team to get that win that nobody thought they would get. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, the next year, Roy's going to figure again.
Okay.
Because now Roy's learned the ropes of how it all works. And at this point, you can imagine 12 years in a row the Americans have won. The FIM has changed the format. They've changed locations. They've done all kinds of things. And what they do in 1993 is they award it to a track called Schwanenstadt in Austria, and they have to put a bigger starting gate on it because it's not used to having this many riders. And the way the starting gate works is it was basically behind a tree if you were on the far inside gate. And when it came time to do the drawing of who's going to go where, they reach in the bucket and boom, Team USA draws the number one gate pick. But that doesn't mean we got the first pick. That meant we got the first gate.
Oh, no.
The one on the far inside. And Roy goes to bat for Team USA and says, hey, no way, this ain't going to happen. And the FIM says, well, we're not going to redraw. And then Roy says, move the tree or move the starting gate. Well, they can't move the tree because, Europe doesn't work that way. It's not quite as easy as it is here in the States to, maybe go cut a tree down, or move a bunch of fence or whatever the case may be. And, sure enough, they went out there and looked at it and said, yeah, we don't think we can do this. And Roy said, then we're not racing. We're not going to participate. It sent a shiver through the FIM, the jury, and everyone else. And pretty soon, here came the shovels, and here came the tractor. They moved it just enough to give us a fair shot, and then everything else just kind of fell together.
It's good to know that if you're on the receiving end of Roy, when he's got a point to prove, on either end of the planet, it's still going to work. You will move that starting gate, or you will move that tree if Roy wants it to happen. Let's talk about the team. This is an interesting scenario because if I remember, there was so much heat for the riders not wanting to be on the team in '92, and this is proof that history always repeats itself. It's not like Eli Tomac not racing the last 2 years. He's not the first guy to not want to ride for the team when he was our best pick. '93, if I remember, they even let the fans, I think, in on it a little bit through the magazines to kind of pressure the riders into not being able to back out. And then that leads to the new Supercross champ who's not that well established in motocross yet. You got to put him on the team. He's the sensation of the sport. So he's on the team. Jeremy McGrath, welcome aboard.
Yeah, Jeremy McGrath is and I got to say, he was reluctant, and he had a reason to be reluctant. They wanted him to ride the 250. At this point, McGrath is the 250 Supercross champion. Just the shocking to think it a year before you have Jean-Michel Bale, Damon Bradshaw, Jeff Stanton, Mike Kudrowski battling for the 250 title, the Supercross title, and the next year they're nowhere near Jeremy McGrath. He just absolutely changes everything. But what he hadn't changed was motocross. He was still riding a 125 Honda outdoors and wasn't even the champion there. He won a couple nationals, but it was a long shot at best to put McGrath at that point on a 250. But he answered the call. He said, I'll go. I'll go do this. I can't promise you anything. And but he went over and he did the best he could. It was his first outdoor race in Europe. He was up against a lot of people that especially Kurt Nicole, who told us when we did a story on the '93 Des Nations just how much he wanted to break Jeremy's leg if he got a chance. He was just so jealous that everyone was talking about this kid, who could jump a motorcycle but little else. Well, we all know that Jeremy would definitely learn how to ride a motorcycle on the flat ground just as well as the up in the air, but he was a real unknown entity then. But he did his job that day. He went 4-7, not setting the world on fire, but that fourth place finish was just what we needed because once again Jeff Emig comes through with a 2-1 on the 125, and Mike Kudrowski has to come through in the last moto on the 500. He has to dig from way back to finish third after winning the first moto. And there you have it, 13 years in a row for Team USA.
Yeah, so it really helped that they got Kudrowski back in it after he skipped 92. He was almost like that Stanton-level guy on the team now. And now Emig is a veteran. Emig is actually going to start kind of quietly a really long run on Team USA. Emig goes from, who's this guy, why is he even on the team in 92, to 93. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Emig's a main player, and then he becomes a huge factor in all these things.
Yes.
Yep.
And Emig, is now 2-0 in the Des Nations, and Kudrowski is 3-0 at this point. But here's an interesting thing. We should have lost that race that year, and not because of the fact they moved the starting gate for Roy. We should have lost because the Italians were the better team. And they had Andrea Bartolini, they had Claudio Federici, and they had Alessandro Puzar. And that is a really, really good team. Schwanenstadt is very close to Italy, so there was a huge contingent of Italian fans there. And Bartolini goes out in the first moto and actually beats Emig on the 125. But then the second moto, when they're ready to have Ali Puzar, the guy they call Crazy Horse, to go out and just dominate the 250 class, they are late getting through the crowd to the Parc Fermé. And if you don't get your bike into the Parc Fermé 15 minutes before the race and they shut the gate, that gate never comes open again.
Crazy.
And the Italians are basically knocked out of the race.
They don't even get to compete, basically. They can't even go to the gate.
No. And Franco Cervis, who was basically the underwriter of the Italian team at the time, famously said, I have 70 people on this team, and none of them has a frickin' stopwatch.
Hey, being really fast but not being reliable on time, that is about as Italian as it gets in racing. It's going to look good when we're doing it. We're not saying that we're going to be on time. And I heard, wasn't it partially because the crowd and everything was so crazy, it was just hard to get down there? I mean, we know what the nations is like. Crowd's nuts at these events.
They were trying to get to, they were definitely pushing through, and Puzar was right there. And what's funny, this would happen to Ryan Hughes in Portugal about 10 years later when he's racing the 250 GPs. I take it back, it was 7 years later. He wins the first moto and is late to the gate for the second moto, and he doesn't get to race. It was his one closest chance he had to win in a GP. But it's anything that could go wrong for everyone else did go wrong for everyone else for 13 straight years. And that's where the winning streak is we go into what will become our Waterloo, and that is a place in Switzerland called Roggenburg.
Yeah, what's odd to me is when you look at the B team in 92 and RJ and all these guys getting hurt and losing all these guys and just throwing other guys in. McGrath, we didn't know in 93 how that would go, and it worked well. I don't recall going into 94. It was almost like, whatever, they always win. They always win. It'll just work out. There were other years where it seemed more likely that Team USA would lose. This one didn't seem like anything to worry about, but it didn't work out.
No, it did not. And there's a few things about it. First of all, Roy Jansen left the AMA right before the event. He went. Do you remember when there was a schism between Supercross and the AMA, and there was going to be a thing called AIR, which was American International Racing or whatever? The AMA has no team manager. DeCoster's in Europe. Jansen is working for the non-AMA, and so they asked Bevo to be the team manager. And the sad part is no one was more enthusiastic about the designations than Bevo over the years. And that's why it's sad, because Bevo will be the team manager that loses the Peter Chamberlain Cup once and for all. And it happens in Switzerland in 1994. Not only is Roger not there, Roy's not there, Jeremy decides not to go. He's once again the Supercross champion, and he's dedicated himself to being a better motocross rider, but he just, I think it still stung the criticism he got the year before. He doesn't go, and then Doug Henry, the two-time AMA 125 national champion, I can't remember specifically, and maybe you can help me, but I think there was concern about his health. He was getting sick between motos. He was having trouble with altitude when he'd fly. And so they made the decision to put Imig on the 125. And by this point, Imig is, been in the 125 class for 5 years. He's a smart pick. He knows the system. He knows the race. And then they put the Kawasaki teammates, Kudrowski on the 250 and Larocco on the 500. That sounds on paper like a hell of a team.
Yep.
But for some reason that day, it just didn't happen. They just couldn't get out of one another's ways. And although Larocco won the last moto on the 500, by then it was a done deal. We weren't going to win that race. And the irony is, Jeff Emig, television host, would be beat by Paul Malin, the television host. In 1994, the two fastest guys on the track were the 125 riders, And ironically, they never knew each other back then. In fact, they didn't know each other until I believe I introduced them at the 2006 Motocross of Nations when it was at Matterley Basin. And Imig, who took the loss in Roggenburg that day really, really, really hard, went out in the infield and sat on a log and just cried his eyes out. He was so bummed out that he let America down. 12 years later, when he meets Malin, I'm like, hey, this is Paul Malin. And Jeff looks at him and goes, I have no idea who you are. And Malin gets like a weird look on his face, like, what? And then Jeff goes, oh, wait a minute. And he steps around behind him and looks at his back. He goes, oh, I know who you are. I recognize you now. You're Paul Malin.
Ah, that is awesome.
He goes, I've never seen you from the front.
And those guys, they try to just keep it on the current riders, the current year, when they're announcing a couple GPs a year and the nations together on TV. But that is the irony. That battle between those two is one of the most pivotal moments in the history of the event, and then they end up becoming the announcing crew on television most years for this race.
It is a testament to just what that race means to a guy, win or lose. You know, and fortunately, over the years, Jeff Emmett will go 3-3. But for Malin in England, you have to remember this and put this in the context of where we are right now as America. We haven't won since 2011. We're really upset about that. But imagine you're England, and you last won in the 60s.
Wow.
And it takes until 1994, and a team made up of Paul Malin, Kurt Nicole, and a South African transplant named Rob Herring to finally win the Peter Chamberlain Cup again. And they haven't won it since. They haven't got close. The closest they got was last year at Matterley Basin in the mud when Max Anstey won both motos. But as a team, the British are as long shots now as they were in 1994.
Yeah. And for Malin, I mean, that was that legendary one great ride. I mean, he was a decent GP rider. I don't even know. Did he win GPs? It was just,
he did.
He did. Okay.
Paul won a handful of 500 GPs when he was riding for Kawasaki, and then he'd go on to win a few 125 GPs as well. But you know, contrary to what Jody saw and thought, and what I think we all thought after what we saw in '94, he never did win a world title. Ironically, he's the face and voice of the FIM World Championships now, and I got to admit, the best one-man broadcasting crew I've ever heard in my life.
I agree. I agree. And they just send the poor guy on an island and say, "We'll see you in a couple hours. Good luck, sir."
and he pulls it off every weekend on mxgp.tv. .com. Anyway, the streak is finally over, and you think that now we're just going to get right back to winning, but this enters into a weird phase for Team USA. They say losing can be a habit if you don't get right back in the game. But we don't get right back in the game, and there's sort of some lost years to come.
Yes, so 95, they give it the old college try. A good team goes over. They race hard. This isn't, Malin just has that one incredible day. And what was the famous line from Jack Bernicle, the journalist, in 94 about Malin?
He said, Jesus could not have beaten Paul Malin that day.
There you go. 95 is like a heads up. It's not like anyone rides out of this world. It's just two really strong teams, a couple really strong teams having a close battle all day long.
Yeah, this time there is starting to become an Achilles heel in the American effort, and that is by 1995, we've done away with the 500 class in America. In fact, the only time that 1993 AMA 500 champion Mike LaRocca will ever get to wear the number one plate is at Roggenburg in the 94 Nations on the 500, because we don't have a 500 class anymore. And it begins this annual sort of pulling straws to see who's going to go. Yamaha no longer has a 500. Suzuki's long since not had a 500. So it's always got to be a Honda rider or a Kawasaki rider. And in 95, they decide that Ryan Hughes, who's never ridden the 500 in his life before, except maybe Mammoth Mountain as an amateur. They put Ryan Hughes on the 500 and send him to Slovakia with Steve Lamson, who is our 125 national champion, and Jeff Emig, who is our, I think he was the 250 national champion. No, not yet. But he is a very fast 250 rider.
Yep. Jeremy
McGrath is the 95 250 national champion, and he once again decides not to go. Mm-hmm. It's just not for him, and you know, when you win 3 Supercross titles in a row and absolutely dominate the sport and hover over the industry, you can make those decisions, and Jeremy just wasn't ready to go back yet. So we go over, and this time it's not Paul Malin who has the incredible race. It's a 16-year-old French kid named Sebastien Tortelli. He beats Lamson and Stephen Everts in both motos in the 125 class, and then Emig finds himself battling with something he's never battled with before in the 250 class, and that is a 4-stroke 650cc Husqvarna that Joel Smets is riding for Belgium. And Emig said before the race, you know, are you going to let that guy beat you? And he says, we're Americans. We don't get beat by 4 strokes. little did Jeff know that Yamaha had one on the drawing board over in Japan at that time. Uh-huh. But that's a whole different podcast.
Right.
So anyway, it comes down to the last moto. Emig is leading, and he realizes that until Ryan Hughes gets up and gets around Smets, the big guy on the Husaberg or Husqvarna or whatever it was, that we're not going to win. So Emig does the ultimate team sacrifice. He slows the race down. He's out front. He completely starts blocking the track, and he's allowing Hughes to catch Smets. The problem is Hughes has someone else riding with him in Kurt Nicole from England. And right when 4 of them get together going up a big uphill, Nicole gets sideways on this really rocky ledge, sort of stalls a bit in front of Emig, and Emig slams into the back of him, and just like that, we're done. Team USA loses again, and this time it's Belgium that wins, and they win for the first time in 15 years.
That has to feel good because they were so close. It's so many of those. Everts was on some great teams. I guess now it's like everyone's getting their just desserts. They're finally getting what they've worked so hard for and probably deserved so many times before. Yeah. Okay, so that's 95, and a quick USA gets their heads above water again real quick after this.
Yeah, now we're mad. And when I say we're mad, the American motorcycle industry's mad. We're so used to winning. We feel like we've got the best riders in the world, and if we really have them, we need to send them. And so in 1996, they convinced Jeremy McGrath to once again raise his hand and say, yeah, I'll go. He's the 4-time Supercross champion by now. And his outdoor game is as good as anybody's. In fact, he and Jeff Emig will take the championship down to the very last moto at Steel City. Emig will win, but Jeremy, did a really good job of trying to defend his title. But when it comes time to pick Team USA, Emig raises his hand and says, if Jeremy goes, I'll ride the 500. So Jeremy, doesn't have a way out, and he doesn't want one. He's probably tired of it too, and he knows how good he is now. Jeremy goes to Spain on the 250. Emig goes on the 500, and Steve Lamson goes on the 125. If you want to make an argument that this team was every bit as good as the 86 team of O'Mara, Bailey, and Johnson, I honestly don't have a problem with that. The 96 team was phenomenal.
Yeah, Lamson wins a moto outright in the 125. That's crazy. First time to do it, right? I think so.
He was the first guy ever to do it, and no one did it after that either.
Whoa.
Tony Cairoli will do it in 06 on a 250F, and we certainly know what Villopoto is going to do in '07. But that '96 race by Lamson was historic. But there was an odd thing that day. They decided to build the track on the infield of the Jerez F1 circuit in Spain. And it had a bunch of hills, but rather than just making a traditional hilly European course, they put a bunch of really big jumps in it. And so this is the race where you see, the Europeans, some of them like really complaining about these jumps and threatening to boycott and looking, scared to death as they jump these big quadruples and triples. And then you have Steve Lamson doing heel clickers on the 125 and McGrath doing knacks. And it was a steamroll of a race for the Americans. They absolutely got back on top in that race. If not for Emig slipping back to fourth in the last moto, it'd have been that 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. I'm sorry, I take that back. Sebastian Tortelli was second in that first 125 moto. But the point is, it seemed for all the world that Team USA was back because that was another absolutely dominant win. But unfortunately, that would not be the case.
Yeah, so what happened? Actually, the terrible win streak, and really they don't win a lot here over, seriously, almost a decade after this. It goes
well,
bad.
The FIM giveth and the FIM taketh away, because after giving us a track that was perfect for the Americans in '96, in '97 it went to a track in Nimes, Belgium, and as clear and a sunny day as you could ever imagine, and yet it turned out to be a mud race because they watered the piss out of that track in Belgium. I'll never forget just how heavy it was. And I remember Roger DeCoster, who's now back as Team USA manager because he's working with Suzuki in America. DeCoster walks out the start straightaway, and there's a guy standing there with a water hose and a cigarette just drenching this track. And Roger starts yelling at him in Flemish, what are you doing? You're ruining the track, whatever. And the guy, looks at Roger, takes a puff off his cigarette, and just shrugs and just keeps watering. It was. They made it into a mud pit, and we that year we sent it was John Dowd, Jeff Emig, and I believe the third guy, it was Steve Lamson. Even though our 125 national champion was Ricky Carmichael, no one, like McGrath in '93, no one really thought Ricky was ready for this kind of race, and maybe he wasn't. Lamson was a good bet. I mean, he just won outright the year before, but it just didn't work out. Dowd, didn't have a good day. Lammy didn't have a good day, and Emig had a horrible day. And in hindsight, I got to say this was the beginning of sort of that downward spiral that would mark the last couple of years of Jeff's career. He just didn't have his mind on it, and we got beat pretty good. And that time it was Belgium again, and it was a home win for them, a big deal. And you could tell something was wrong with Team USA.
I feel like the overwatering the track in Belgium to help Belgian riders who are good mud riders, that's why they have that emoji now of the stroking the chin. They turned it into a mud race on a sunny day. They didn't need to water the track the next year. They didn't need to do it in '98.
The Fox Hills race in 1998, I remember it for two things. One, Stephen Everts absolutely rode the wheels off his CR250 Honda, absolutely dominated everyone. It was a work of art. It was truly. I know that we'll get to '06, and that's Stephen's masterpiece, his walk-off masterpiece. But what he did in Fox Hills in '98 kind of cemented him forever in my mind as the best mud rider of all time.
Wow.
And I've had DeCoster tell me that as well. And nobody has seen more races than Roger DeCoster. Everts was phenomenal. Ricky shows up, and Ricky wasn't a good mud rider at this time, but I thought he acquitted himself well. But the middle moto had to be red flagged, something I'd never seen in an event of that caliber. They red flagged the race because so many people got stuck on this one really steep hill, including a guy that is considered one of the best U.S. mud riders of all time, John Dowd. The only bright spot for Team USA that day, and this is kind of lost to history, but Doug Henry won the first moto outright for Team USA. It was his one and only appearance in the Motocross of Nations. He was riding that four-stroke Yamaha, and it seemed like good things might happen to us because I think Ricky had gotten fourth in the 125 or third, but it just went all downhill from there. We really had a bad day.
Yeah, between Dowd and Henry, coincidentally, just happened to be in the team, and then it's muddy. I know people were pumped. They're like, well, those are our two best mud riders. But I remember this quote of someone saying, Dowd and Henry are good at beating Californians in the mud, not Europeans. Dowd didn't even have a chance with the way the track was rerouted. Okay, so 98, blow that one off. Another bad one, 97, 98, not good. This one is 99. That seems like a lost one. That was in Brazil. I feel like there was very little coverage of that race because it wasn't in Europe like it traditionally is. That's a lost race.
And this is the first one in South America.
Yep.
And it was a bad day for Team USA. I had mentioned, how Bradshaw, sort of was in pressure-packed situations. Well, Kevin Windham was like that a little bit too. And, he would get a win later on, but he just didn't have his best stuff that day in Brazil. And neither did Mike LaRocco. But it wasn't either of their faults. And it really wasn't the third member's fault either. But Ricky Carmichael had what must be considered his worst day as a professional. He goes out and crashes early in both motos and has his bike run over in both motos and DNFs both motos. It was just a horrible day for Carmichael.
Yeah, if I remember right, I think when he got run over, it ripped the throttle cable out of his bike, which is like a 1 in a billion chance, and it was like one turn, and his race was already over. It's a lot of effort to go down to Brazil for that.
That was the second moto. The first moto, his pipe gets smashed in, it's just horrible. And the winners that day, it was a crapshoot because so many things were going wrong for so many people. But Italy ends up winning, and now Team USA has quietly lost 5 out of the last 6 Motocross of Nations, and it seems like people are starting to lose interest in the race again, not because of the pressure to win, but now it's just the bother of going, because it like you said, they made all this effort to go to Brazil, and hardly anyone knew about it or remembers it. It's hard to find footage of it. It wasn't big in the United States, and it was a large outlay of money, and it seems like things are going to fall off. But what Brazil does do is it manages to piss Ricky Carmichael off as much as you could piss someone off ever. And this is angry Ricky. This is where competitive Ricky really starts to show his face. He's a 3-time 125 national champion by 2000. He jumps on a 250. He's working with Johnny O'Mara and Alden Baker now. He's getting in shape, and he decides that he's going to take on the world. The problem is he can't get a lot of guys to go with him. We've got Jeremy, who was riding Supercross only, and no one wants to ride the 500 at that point. Emig is done. He's still not announced his retirement. That'll come a short time later at the Vegas Supercross. But the really good riders of the 90s they're kind of gone. Doug Henry's retired, and so they decide to ask Ryan Hughes, who by this point is sort of on the second act of his career racing GPs in Europe. They ask him if he will ride a stroked out 250 in the 500 class, and Travis Pastrana shows up to ride the 125.
Yeah, how about that?
16 years old. Travis, hard to hold down at this point. And he proves that by over-jumping a few things, just incredible over-jumps, going through a fence. There's that famous photo of him jumping over Roncada's head. He put on quite a show over in France, but in the end it was Carmichael, who won the 250 class, and Ryan Hughes, who gets a gift in the last turn of the first moto, when James Dobbs' bike stalls out right in front of him, Team USA wins in large part because of what happens to all the other guys, including the French 250 world champion, Frédéric Bollet, has his nose broken by a rock in the morning. And
he doesn't even race. He doesn't even line up. Yep.
Doesn't even line up.
Yep.
And no, I take it back.
Or did he try one moto?
Race.
Did he try one moto?
Yeah.
That race was that was supposed to be, I remember well, the French were making such inroads. Maybe that's what made it harder to find riders for Team USA. A lot of the good factory rides in the United States are now going to Europeans. That wasn't the case in the 80s, but certainly once Bale starts it, and then you get all these guys, and not just Europeans, even Albertine from South Africa, he's taking up a good slot. Between Villemin and Tortelli and Roncada, a lot of the fastest riders in the United States aren't going to be on Team USA. And for how good the French were in the U.S. in 2000, and knowing that they were hosting the race, they had Tortelli and Roncada, who are great. They had the 250 world champ, who's obviously great, and it was at home. It seemed like it was all lining up for the French to finally get one, and the luck was not on their side, and Team USA is back on top. Yep.
Yeah, and we probably would have been on top in 2001 as well.
Yep.
Because now we've got a fully committed Ricky Carmichael, and he's going to go race in 2001, despite the fact that he is switching teams from Kawasaki to Honda. It's already known that Ricky, immediately after the last national at Steel City, where he rode a 125 very famously, that he's going to Honda. But we have a strong team in 2001. Mike Brown's going to be the 125 rider. He had just won the 125 national championship. Wyndham was going to go on, I believe, the 250.
I think by then they were just letting 250s race both classes. I believe is how it worked at that point. It was just two 250 guys are fine. Just give us one 125 and you can race whatever you want in the other classes.
I would have to go back and look, but of course, the only thing we remember from September of 2001 was a terrorist attack. On September 11th, I think 10 days before the race, 9/11 happens, and the United States goes on lockdown. A very terrible turn of events, and at that point, the Motocross of Nations doesn't mean a thing, and Team USA decides not to go, and the world understands. And I don't even know who won that year. They did have the race; it was in Namur.
The French team won, oddly, but it was it wasn't all their top dudes. It's Yves Demaria, Luigi Segui, and old DV. David Villemin. So I don't even know where Tortelli and Roncada and a lot of these other Bollet, I don't know where they were. A different French team ends up getting the win that a lot of people thought they'd have the year before, but no Team USA even competing.
Yeah. Yep. And then we get to 2002. And I've said this a couple times. It's a whole different podcast. But one day,
oh my gosh,
I would love to do a deep dive into what the hell happened at Competition Park in San Jacinto, California, because it wasn't a motocross race. The event is given back to the United States, but it doesn't go to RedBud or Unadilla or Budds Creek or High Point or anything like that. For some reason, Dorna, which is running the show at that time, decides to give it to an unknown promoter who is going to put it at an unbuilt motocross track on an Indian reservation. And if it sounds too weird to believe, that's because it was too weird to believe. It didn't happen. There's probably a lot of people that still have tickets for the 2002 Motocross of Nations. Absolute fiasco. No Team USA. Bless the heart of Tom White and Bud Feldkamp and the people at Glen Helen who tried to put something on for the fans that traveled over, because, I mean, it didn't get canceled until the Saturday before the race. And a lot of people are already en route to the United States. A lot of teams are already in California. Glen Helen put on what they call the World Cup, which ironically was won by Australia, which has never won the Motocross of Nations.
Yeah. There was a makeshift Team USA at that event, but Carmichael and LaRocco, I think, both said, "Yeah, we're not doing this. If it's not the Motocross of Nations, this has been a fiasco. We're out." They threw together. I think Sean Hamlin was on the team because he was local to California.
Yeah, Timmy Ferry, Sean Hamlin. Can't remember who else, but yeah.
I was there and I can't remember. That's how weird that race was.
Yeah, but they did something. They tried to.
It was cool for the fans. It was cool. Yep.
For the fans, it was cool, and it was something to salvage the honor of American motocross. And but the next year, it doesn't come back to America. The next year, I take it back. They did end up having a Des Nations that year too.
Yeah, like
they
a month
had
later
it
or something.
Yep. I think in Bel Puig.
Yep.
In Spain, and it doesn't matter who won.
Yeah.
The next year we go to Belgium, and they once again decide to build the track in the infield of an F1 course, this time in Zolder, and but they do this weird thing where they decide to have a one moto format, so that the race can be live all over Europe. We send over again. We're having trouble plugging that third hole. Ricky's going to go on a 250 Honda, and then we send. There is no 250F in this race. We send Tim Ferry on a YZ 450, and we send Ryan Hughes on a KTM 450. And that seems like a pretty solid team. And Ricky goes out, and he has this beautiful match race, I guess you'd call it, with Stefan Everts, who's riding the four-stroke 450 Yamaha. Ricky beats him in front of the King of Belgium. Stefan wanted to win so bad, it was incredible, but it just wasn't to be. Carmichael was better than him that day, and Everts said that in the press conference, which I thought was just a huge mark of respect from the King of Europe to the King of American motocross at the time. And those guys would, go on to become really good friends after that meeting. And but the other Team USA members had days they'd rather forget about. Ferry broke his thumb in practice, or tore the ligaments, and just wasn't that fast. And then Ryan Hughes had the chain snap on his KTM. And so we had one finish. It was a first.
Yeah.
And that was Ricky's. Ferry did finish, but he was back their ways. And Everts didn't win the battle, but Everts won the war. Belgium won the Des Nations that year.
All right, so that's 03. And then what the hell happens in 04? We just don't have a team. What the heck? What happened? We just didn't have one.
04 didn't happen because of the perfect storm of 05.
Yeah.
Let me put that into context. We all talk about the perfect storm, that first Anaheim race in 05. It was, Ricky, Chad Reed, James Stewart was jumping up to the 250 class. McGrath was coming out of retirement for fun.
Pastrana was trying to mount a little comeback. Yep.
Pastrana was trying to do a comeback. There was just all kinds of things going on. And Wyndham was coming on strong on the 450 with his comeback. But all of that had, guys had to get ready for that. Ricky was once again switching teams. He had parted ways with Honda and was moving to Suzuki. James Stewart, had just been the most dominant 125 rider ever. He was moving up. And neither of them wanted to go in 04 because they really were focused at the coming war between the two of them and the reigning Supercross champion, who was Chad Reed, and these other guys that were kind of all coming together. And DeCoster decides, rather than throw together what would have been a C team, because of so many guys that were just unavailable, decides not to go in 04. There is no team.
Okay, so yeah, just too many guys switching teams and too much. My whole life is about January 8th or whatever the heck it was for Stewart and all these guys. So just straight up no Team USA. By the way, do you know, was there any FIM blowback or anything? Because a couple times you're saying in the 80s, 79 and 80, we didn't have a team. They were not happy about it. Did that matter? Did they care?
They did not care as much, and here's why. The balance of power in global motocross in the 70s was in Europe. By 2004, the balance of power is in the United States. We're getting many of the best riders. At that point, Tortelli, Chad Reed, Roncada, Billiman, that was, and to be followed by Porcel and all these other guys. Albertine had just, finished up.
Yep.
And the AMA and FIM, the FIM had an interest here because of the World Supercross Series. A podcast that we did another time.
Yeah.
It was. They didn't get a smack on the knuckles or anything like that. If anything, it convinced the FIM that in order to get American interest back, they needed to bring the race back to America, and that would happen in 2007. But in the meantime, Ricky Carmichael decides in 2005 that he's got a limited amount of time left in his career, and he wants to go back to Europe. He wants to prove that he's the best rider in the world. He doesn't want the three opportunities that he missed in 01 and 02 and then 04. He didn't want to miss anymore, and he was ready to get back in the game. And the Coster was more than willing to join him because, the Motocross of Nations is a big part of Roger's legacy, too, not just as a rider, but obviously with Team USA. And so we are able to send, at the time, what would have to be the best American team. The newly crowned 125 national champion Ivan Tedesco, Kevin Windham on a 450 Honda for MX3, and Ricky Carmichael to ride the 450 in the MX1 division. This time, Windham stands up under the pressure and gets his one and only Des Nations win, unless Puerto Rico wins in a couple weeks next weekend.
Yeah, that's right.
And Ricky goes out and does his thing. And the coolest thing I can remember about that race is at the start of the last moto. It was pretty close between us and France, and we knew we had to get good starts. And the real thorn in the sides for the Americans at that time was Mikel Pichon. And on the start, Ricky gets the whole shot and immediately goes over in the second corner and blocks Pichon on the outside. And it opens the door for Windham on the inside. And all of a sudden, Team USA is 1-2 off the start in the crucial final moto. And Windham will go back a little bit. Townley's the one who ends up getting second, but Ricky does his job. The World Motocross crown is firmly atop his head, and Team USA is once again back on top.
Yeah, Tedesco, I think he was actually on the Pro Circuit 250F that year. And then this gets weird because in 06, okay, we're finally going to have, inevitably we're going to have James Stewart and Ricky Carmichael on the same team in the same year. It's inevitable. Eventually we'll have this unbelievable super team, and they'll just win every moto by a minute. And it's supposed to happen, I think, for 06. And then the craziest thing happens. Carmichael gets hurt. He never gets hurt. He actually got hurt.
Yeah. The weird thing in Ricky's career is the last day of as a full-time racer, which was the Glen Helen National in 2006, Ricky's battling with Stewart, goes down in the sand wash, and ends up hurting his shoulder. Bad enough that he's a no-go for the Des Nations, which is just, 2 weeks later. Bikes and everything have already been shipped, and the Coster's got a real problem, and it is decided that they are going to ask a guy who'd been on the sidelines for most of the summer, Ivan Tedesco, to go over and ride as the third man on the team alongside Stewart and Ryan Villopoto. And even though that race is remembered almost entirely for what Stefan Everts did that day, it was Ryan Villopoto's sort of welcoming or coming out party on the global motocross stage, and he goes out and wins the first moto of the 250 class. He's behind Everts and Stewart, but he does manage to beat Tony Cairoli, Ben Townley, Tommy Searle and all of the fast GP guys are riding 250s at that point, and that ends up really being the anchor for Team USA.
Yeah, rough one. Stewart, I mean, he's on a winning team, but much like Everts being on the winning team against Carmichael in 03, all anyone wants to talk about is the individual moto where he got beat by Everts, even though Team USA won. And you know what? Again, nothing changes. People are hyping up Tomac versus Hurlings to a degree almost as big as the individual team win this weekend. So that's just how these things work sometimes. Stewart versus Everts was it 12 years ago. All right, so Team USA, we got a streak now, 2 in a row.
Yeah, and you know, I feel like these next few years just kind of run together.
Yep.
Team USA will go on to win a couple close ones, a couple not so close ones, all the way through 2011. And along the way, we've got a lot of guys who step in a pinch and do some pretty incredible things. And some of them, you know, are kind of lost, you know, in the shuffle, like the fact that Jake Weimer went and raced in Italy and really helped us win in 2009, or Ryan Dungey jumping up to the 450 in 09, even though he was the 250 champion here in America and had never ridden a 450 outdoors. They needed him, and he went and did it. And Ivan Tedesco, 3 different occasions they needed Ivan, or 3 different times.
Yep.
And he went and just did that yeoman effort. And then you had the real stars, you know, guys like Villopoto, he and Dungey, of course, in 2011, riding across the finish line arm in arm. And not to skip over it, but what Ryan Villopoto did in 2007 is one of the all-time performances on the global motocross stage that is the Des Nations. To me, you know, going 1-1 on the 250 at Budds Creek, I don't know how you can't put that right alongside Johnny O'Mara in 1986, or even Steve Lamson in 1996, or Caroli the year before when he won the second moto outright. It was Ricky's last race, but it was really, you know, the shift from Ricky to Villopoto as far as, you know, the world's fastest redhead, we'll say.
Well, you mentioned a couple times how guys like Bradshaw, you saw this race really exposes how well you do under pressure. And the world suddenly realized this Villopoto guy, when it comes time to get it done and it has to be done, that would kind of define his career. When it came time to win donations or titles or big races, he pretty much came up every time, including the last time in 11. Big performance in the third moto. He and Dungey dig it out. It was close to them in France. They win in 2011. And at that point, the win streak is pretty solid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight. It's kind of like the 80s again. You kind of think we're just going to keep on winning, but that's strange. That 2011 is the end.
Well, at that point, the cards are starting to get stacked against us. Mm-hmm. And not in ways that they were before. But there were changes that were happening in America and changes that were happening in Europe that would really start to tilt this in favor of a Europe-based team. And it may not seem like much to say it in a podcast, with the United States, because we were in a recession and the teams really didn't want to be on the road as much as they were, the Nationals decided to end before Labor Day. And that meant the last weekend in August was the last race for the domestic calendar. At the same time, the GPs were expanding. You know, they have a different system, and they don't have Supercross, and they start in March, and they were going well into September. And what that was leaving was this sort of imbalance where our guys were done, and they didn't want to go back and stay in shape for a month while everyone else was getting married or going to Lake Havasu or, you know, doing all their honey-do list or whatever. They just wanted to take a break. The dynamics of being a professional motocrosser in America had changed completely to the point where it was not a year-round job, but it was an 11-month-a-year job. The month you took off was September. and our guys started going into the designations a little rusty and a little burned out. And that would really become apparent in 2012 when we go into what is the worst track in the world for us, Lommel. Even though that's where we won in 1981 to get this whole thing started, we'd gotten so far away from that style of track and that style of racing that we were just kind of lost when we went to Lommel and raced in the sand. Dungy, who was always there when America needed him, just didn't have a good day. And Blake Baggett had an awful day. And only Barsha, did as best he could, but we just weren't ready for all the things that happened. But we sure as hell didn't think that Germany was going to win. That should have been a Belgian race to win, a Dutch race to win, or maybe even the Italians. But that's the way it works sometimes, that you just, everything goes right for your team. And that was the first time in a very, very long time for Germany, and the last time for Germany since. And that kind of begins this weird era that I think we're in right now, that we're all hoping that we break out of at RedBud next Sunday, where we just can't seem to put 5 good motos together on any given day, and don't always get our best riders over there because of the constraints of the schedule. And of course, the other thing that changed was they started offering $1 million to sweep all 3 motos of the Monster Cup. $1 million is a lot of money, and as we talked about before, Marvin Musquin didn't ride for France last year, but he won $994,000 more than the winning French team did because he stayed home and rode the Monster Cup and won. So those are some of the things, those are excuses, but they're valid excuses. There's a reason that Eli Tomac doesn't want to go every year, and it's not because he's not American or un-American. It's because his schedule just doesn't allow for that extra 6 weeks to stay on the pipe. And, if you want to have an extended career, if you want to have your health, if you want to have your focus, everybody needs a little time off. And, as we've talked about in this whole podcast, I think the only guy I can think of that ever didn't say yes multiple times to going, that actually went a whole bunch of times, was Jeff Emig.
Never turned it down, right? Yeah,
he was 3-3 on Team USA, but he never once said no. And I think that some of those guys in the 80s, like Johnny O'Mara and Jeff Ward, were the same way. But, things are different now. Schedule's different. The expectations of what a pro athlete has to do are different. And we also we keep having bad luck. That one stupid thing that happens, Jeremy Martin breaks his foot in Latvia. Jason Anderson gets landed on in Italy. Justin Barsha gets stuck in a fence in Belgium.
Yeah. Tomac had a big crash when he was battling Roxon in Tuchenthal. Yep.
And that's, add it all up, and it's 7 losses in a row, or 6, or whatever number we're at now. And it's weird because you go from 7 in a row to losing, 6 or 7 in a row. Hopefully that ends next week because, for the first time in a long time, I think it's safe to say that the 3 best riders that we have right now are going to RedBud to ride for Team USA. The crazy thing is that they're going to ride numbers, 25, 26, and 27?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how bad it was last year.
Yeah. Yeah, we never have numbers that high. It's really strange. I mean, in a couple of those years when the team was coming back from not even racing, wasn't Carmichael like number 89 or something one year? Because we didn't even compete the year before.
Yeah, 85, 86, and 87.
Yeah.
And we have high digits in 81, too, because we hadn't gone the year before.
Yeah.
This is the first time when we just have really low numbers because last year was a fiasco in England with Cole Seeley's bike breaking and Tom Covington hurting his knee and Zach Osborne, having one good moto at least.
Yeah.
It was a tough day, but that's the beauty of the Des Nations. Not only do you have to send a really good competitive team, you got to have a lot of things go right for you. And nothing went right in the 70s. Everything went right in the 80s. The 90s were mixed. Everything went right from 05 to 11, and nothing's gone right since. It seems like it's time for a change for Team USA. I know we're all counting on it, and I'll leave you and leave this with this one frightening thought, Jason.
Oh, boy.
We have to win this year.
Yes.
Because next year it's in Assen, Holland. And if you thought they had sand at Lommel, all you have to do is Google the Assen MXGP to see the sand that they have over there waiting for us come late September of 2019. And you know that they're going to be, there's going to be 100,000 Dutch fans there, all pulling for Jeffrey Herlings and Glenn Coldenhoff and Tim Van Lunden or whatever his name is.
Who's not even really Dutch, but he's on the team.
But the point is, he's good. And,
yes.
and it's next year's going to be a tough year to win. So I'm glad we're sending our best this year because it'd be nice to at least go into Holland next year as the defending champions once again.
Well, I think you could see that 05 win, as you said, Carmichael kind of took a leadership role, and they got the win, and it's like if the guys go over and they experience winning, it really becomes contagious, and it did for a long time. It went on for 7 or 8 years with a win streak, because when you have a positive experience, I feel like, hey, I would like to get in on this. Hey, I would like to get in on this. So if they have a positive experience at RedBud, and things, if they win on home soil, it's going to be amazing. And you got to figure there's going to be a whole generation of riders that once again will be like, I want to be part of that. I want to go. I want to be on the team. But if they don't get it done, and there's more just sulking on Sunday night when they didn't get it done again, it's going to be that much harder, I bet you, to get guys to want to race next year in what's going to be a very, very difficult race for them. So no pressure, guys, but there's a lot on the line.
Yeah, and it's weird to think that we're in that rare period where we don't have an active guy out there anymore that's won the Des Nations.
Wow.
I guess Baggett would be the last guy that was on a winning
Wyndham
team.
Puerto Rico.
But
Team USA legit? Right. Yes.
Yeah. That's how long it's been, and it's far too long for Team USA.
All right. Well, everything's aligned. We'll see what happens. And, as overwhelming as the odds might be on their side, because we have our 3 best guys and we have a track here, and some of the other teams maybe don't have the guys that they want. With France, it's been tough for them. But like you said, you still have to have a good day. Anything can happen. There are no guarantees at this race, as much as Team USA used to make it look that way. There are no guarantees.
I do have one suggestion for Team USA, though.
All right.
Don't wrap yourself in the flag for the opening ceremonies. In the Olympics, you do that after you win.
Okay.
That was a mistake we made last year because I don't think our guys knew, or they were just protecting themselves from the rain by wrapping themselves up in the flag. But there are no foregone conclusions in a race like this. Everything's got to go right, and you got to go fast.
All right. It's going to be amazing. I hope the results don't cloud what we know is going to be an awesome weekend no matter what. Look, if they happen to not win, anyone that's there, you still need to remember this as an all-time epic show and performance and atmosphere. So hopefully the people get what they want, but it's going to be fun no matter what. Let's just enjoy it for what it is, and hopefully by the end of the night, also everybody has what they want on Sunday.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, the hell with that, Weege. I'm going to win.
Okay. All right. See you in the hospitality area when it's all over. We'll see what the attitudes are. Hopefully it's really good.
All right. Thanks a lot, and go Team USA.
Oh, boy, it is a conundrum for me this weekend. That's Davey. I'm back now. And I really wonder, I usually try to check my emotions and feelings at the door. I'm supposed to be an unbiased journalist. And as we say in the journalism world, you don't root for people, you root for stories. I haven't been to the Motocross Nations in a couple of years now, and I'm sure if Team USA loses, people are going to be all up in my face saying, in your face, because Team USA lost. I'm really not trying to stake my reputation on this team. I'm just going to try to cover the race somewhere in a position of neutrality. But if they do win, it'll probably be pretty hard to not get caught up in the hijinks after the race on Sunday. But I really have to decide, am I coming here as a Team USA supporter or am I coming here as an unbiased journalist? I say today it's unbiased journalist, but maybe I'll get swept in it like Davey apparently is about to. So, all right, good luck to the boys. Aaron Plessinger, Eli Tomac, Justin Barsha. We'll see how it goes. You can see everything you need to see, wall-to-wall coverage. Of course, RacerX Online, we're going to have about 100 staff people there. Everyone wanted to go to this race. That's no surprise. You can watch the RacerTV.com show Friday and Saturday night. That's our race day stage from the track, 6 to 11 p.m., both Friday and Saturday. Tons of people rotating in and out, tons of guests. We'll get Matheson JT. We'll have some of the classic arguments back and forth that we like to do in our podcast. It'll be awesome. So that's Racer TV on Friday and Saturday night, RacerTV.com. The race airs live on CBS Sports Network starting at 1 o'clock Eastern Time on Sunday. MXGP, you can go there if you want the live coverage. That would even include the qualifying races on Saturday. You can sign up for their internet package and watch the racing there, and that'll have a ton of up-to-date news as well. MXGP.com, that's how you follow the race. That's the official website of the Monster Energy Motocross of Nations coming to RedBud this weekend. I've got to thank my sponsor of the Exhaust Podcast. That's Yoshimura. Check them out. Everything you need for your four-stroke exhaust, no matter what country you're racing for at the Motocross of Nations. I'm sure there'll be plenty of bikes looking good and sounding good and running good because they've got Yoshimura pipes on those machines. That's it, everybody. Catch your breath. We'll see you at RedBud.